There's no doubt that Greece got into the crisis because of poor economic policies that they followed before. But there's also no doubt in my mind that the response of the partners within the Eurozone has not been a good one. It has not been good for Greece, it has not been good for the Eurozone. And the reason is that the crisis that we faced in 2010 was so new, so unprecedented, that those involved with policy tried to come up with solutions that just took us from one step to the next, like kicking the bucket down the road and hoping for the best. But that best was not coming, and therefore another kick of the bucket down the road. And I fear that that's what we're still doing, in fact, in the case of Greece and the case of the Eurozone. We haven't really grabbed the bull by the horns and say, this is a problem and we're going to solve it now by following a completely new approach to the Eurozone from the one that we had in Maastricht, which obviously didn't work. The approach that didn't work was the strict fiscal discipline, 60% debt, 3% deficit. We didn't have mechanisms to ensure that that fiscal discipline was followed. Crisis comes and you're faced with threat of bankruptcy to your banks. What do? Maastricht had no answer. The European Central Bank had no answer. They said it's the job of the government, of the national government, to rescue these banks if it was to rescue them and recapitalize them. Maastricht said governments should not have more than 6% debt. But the debt that governments had to take on to recapitalize banks was more than 100% added to what was already there. And therefore we had this inconsistent fiscal and monetary policy working together. It is now the case that there is a system in place supervised by the European Central Bank that will ensure that if a bank has problems, then the national government is not called to borrow more than 100% of its GDP so as to recapitalize that bank. The way that's done is first and most important by the European Central Bank making sure that that bank is not running the risk of being faced with that situation. But if by any chance, any unforeseen circumstances or whatever it is faced with that situation, then the European Central Bank will have to contribute substantially to the recapitalization of that bank if they felt that it was necessary for the Eurozone to recapitalize that bank. The bigger problem that we haven't addressed yet is what to do with fiscal policy. Because fiscal policy now is entirely in the hands of national governments. And there is strong resistance by big and powerful members of the Eurozone, and Germany in particular, to taking away any fiscal sovereignty from the national governments. But having a completely centralized monetary policy and a completely decentralized fiscal policy are inconsistent with each other, as we saw during the crisis. So what we need to do is to bring more centralization in fiscal policy, be more strict about applying something like the Maastricht criteria, but be more strict in forecasting what fiscal policy could be doing in each country, and making firm recommendations as to whether that's a good policy or a bad policy. Many countries in Europe have fiscal policy councils. The best way, I feel, which is something that I've been saying, in fact, ever since the crisis started, if not before, is that we do need a kind of fiscal policy council at European level that will supervise and make recommendations. Fiscal policy councils do not have executive powers. In Britain, it's known as the Office of Budget Responsibility, but it's essentially the same thing. I think the pioneers in that were the Netherlands and Sweden, where they're working effectively as an advisory role, but no government would dare go against the advice and recommendations for the Fiscal Policy Council. The most obvious thing is to write off some of the debt, especially the sovereign debt, the debt that they owe to other Eurozone governments. the German finance minister, but other governments as well, are saying they won't accept any of this haircut, as is known in the financial sector. What's the alternative? Well, the alternative is to play some tricks with that debt. For example, freeze the interest rates at the very low interest rates we have today, freeze them forever. Another solution would be to extend the loan, make it indefinite, say. You wouldn't be losing your capital because on paper it's going to be there, something that the Greek government owes you, but you'll be having a small revenue out of it instead of getting your money and doing what you want with it. But something like that needs to be done.